It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Happy Friday, everybody. And today we have a special spring membership drive edition of our show. Today is Friday, but we are starting the weekend early with guests from our Saturday and Sunday shows. I'll give you the lineup in a minute. From the New Yorker Radio Hour, On the Media, Radio Lab, Open to Debate, and Wait, Don't Tell Me. We'll have people from all those shows this morning. And this is also a very special morning in the membership drive because we have a 2-for-1 match for the whole show this morning. And then we will end today's portion of the membership drive at noon. So you'll get Allison and the whole rest of the day membership drive free after 12 o'clock. And we have a 2-for-1 match for this whole show this morning until then. Craig Newmark, who focuses his giving on supporting journalism and journalism education, is generously offering the money to get this going. For every $1 you donate, Craig will donate another $2. So your donation gets us 3 times, really, what you donate. This will be the only time like this during the spring membership drive. So thank you for helping us to maximize Craig Newmark's generosity right now. Together, you can do a lot to make up for the elimination of federal funding, the total cutoff of that Congress and the Trump administration imposed on us last year. Thank you for considering a first-time membership. Thank you for increasing your membership level. Many of you, by just a little bit, we're asking for $3 a month more on your sustaining memberships when this 2-for-1 match is in effect from now until noon, because every $1 that you add will count toward that. And all the usual thank you gifts are available like any other day. Take a Brian Lehrer Show baseball cap if you want one, or a public radio nerd mug, or anything else. Just go to WNYC.org or call us on the phone at 888-376 WNYC, 888-376-9692. Thank you so much for considering it on this special Friday show being visited by our Saturday and Sunday shows for this 2-for-1 matching day. I'll just give you the math a little bit. If you donate $50, we'll wind up with $150. Donate $100 and we'll wind up with $300. The math is simple, right? For a few of you who might want to join our producer circle, a $1,200 donation, those do count for the 2-to-1 match. So yes, that would result in $3,600 for the station. But your donation, no matter how small or large, has that extra leverage right now. Thank you for doing your part, whatever you decide that is. It's voluntary, of course, to keep public media viable in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area and show those politicians trying to kill this service that we have no plans to go away, right? This is a special opportunity to help us do that in a big way because this morning only we've got this 2-for-1 match. Go to WNYC.org if you're willing, or call 888-376-WNYC, 888-376-9692. So what are we going to do content-wise? Well, we'll have Brooke and Micah from On the Media, Mo Rocca representing Wait, Don't Tell Me, John Donvan, moderator of our Saturday show Open to Debate, and none other than Lulu Miller, co-host of Radio Lab and host of Radio Lab series for kids, Terrestrials, all coming up. And we start with New Yorker staff writer Andrew Marantz representing the New Yorker Radio Hour. Andrew has a new article that contains what he calls a hopeful harbinger for the world, the defeat of Viktor Orban in Hungary's national elections. Andrew has become the first outside journalist to interview the guy who beat Orban, Peter Magyar. Does it mean the rise of authoritarianism there and maybe here might have peaked and is on the decline? We'll discuss. And Andrew was a guest on the Radio Hour a few weeks ago to cover another huge question for us all. Can we trust the masters of the universe who are developing AI? Here's a short clip to get us going from that New Yorker Radio Hour episode as the host, David Remnick, of course, was interviewing Andrew and his co-author, Ronan Farrow from the New Yorker, about whether the world could trust OpenAI and ChatGPT founder Sam Altman with this history-altering technology. David asks about one of their own leaders in the company who had his doubts.
What was the blip?
So one of the top people who they recruited, who was offered $6 million a year at Google and turned it down in order to go work for the good guys, was this guy, Ilya Sutskever, who was on the board in 2023. And he started to get the feeling, as we quote him in the piece, saying, I don't think Sam is the guy who should have his finger on the button, to return to the atom bomb analogy. Right. He starts to rally the board against Sam. Now, this has been a lingering question for years in Silicon Valley. What did Ilya see? What is in his secret memos that he compiled? Is there a smoking gun? Is there some one thing that explains it all? And what we found, and the reason that you graciously gave us 16,000 words to explain it, is that there is not one smoking gun. There is this small accumulation of detailed patterns of behavior that add up to, in aggregate, what people like Sutskever felt was someone who can't be entrusted with this world-altering technology.
For example?
Well, there are certainly specific episodes over the history of OpenAI that have not yet been extensively reported. You know, we have a detailed account of a moment where critics within the company allege, and people threatened to quit over this, a plot was entertained at the highest levels of the company to sell the next generation of this technology, AGI, when it comes, to the highest international bidder, to pit China and Russia and the United States against each other. And that really did prompt some of the safety-minded people in the company to say, you know, as one tells us, this is insane.
So there's an excerpt from the New Yorker Radio Hour. It was David Remnick, the host, interviewing New Yorker staff writer Ronan Farrow and Andrew Marantz about Sam Altman. Andrew Marantz joins us now on the two small topics that he most recently covered, the future of democracy and the future of humanity in an AI world. He is also the author of the book Antisocial: Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Andrew, it's always great to have you. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you, Brian. Always great to be here.
So let's start with AI, and we'll get to democracy versus authoritarianism, your two little topics. And can we start with that clip? It gives me chills, really, to think we can't trust the people making chatbots and other AI tools, considering the enormity of what they might do. Can you give us the context for that clip?
Yeah, enormity is a good word because it goes well beyond chatbots. I mean, so the founding premise of OpenAI specifically was this will be the most world-altering technology since electricity, and it cannot be entrusted to a profit-seeking corporation. The founding premise of OpenAI was we must start a nonprofit, safety-focused research lab to counteract Google, which was then in the lead. And so at the time, this was just only about 10 years ago, that was the premise of Sam Altman and Elon Musk and the other co-founders. Now, obviously, skipping forward to today, that has all fallen apart, and Altman and Musk are now having this court battle in Oakland that's about to wrap up over who duped or defrauded whom. And so it's all fallen apart. But the original vision, according to their own analysis, was this will be incredibly transformative. And that seems to have been largely borne out. The more that generative AI is interwoven into our transportation infrastructure, our healthcare infrastructure, our energy grid, the more it starts to transform things in ways that we don't entirely understand and that, frankly, the people building it don't entirely understand. And so that original premise of, you know, we need congressional regulation, we need executive oversight, we need state regulation. That premise has gone unfulfilled, in large part because these companies have changed their minds from lobbying for regulation to lobbying against it. And so now what we have is the scenario that in some ways these founders feared, or said they feared, which is this kind of barreling full steam ahead in an unregulated way. Now, obviously, there are people who think they were not serious when they asked for regulation, that they were putatively asking for it, knowing it wouldn't happen. And that seems to be where we've ended up.
You know, there's a news hook to this right now of this trial going on that some of our listeners may have heard maybe confusing headlines about, with Elon Musk suing Sam Altman. Musk was also one of the original founders of their company before departing. I think it was in 2018. We know what he's become since then. Is there a good guy in the lawsuit story as you see it, or is that the wrong question?
I don't think that looking for a good guy, as you suggest, is the right way to look at this. I mean, look, we've had... So this is a pretty exhaustive piece that goes through many, as you heard in the clip, many small breadcrumbs and larger breadcrumbs that lead a lot of people to this conclusion that Sam Altman may not be trustworthy. Many people who've worked closely with him, many people who still work with him, indicated as much. But that doesn't necessarily mean, as you suggest, that we should just look for someone else who's more trustworthy to be the AGI dictator. This is a phrase that these guys toss around, apparently in all seriousness, in private emails to each other. AGI dictator. The scenario being, once AGI stands for artificial general intelligence. There's also a concept of artificial superintelligence. We're not quite there yet, although people have arguments about when or if we'll get there or what these terms mean. But the premise, and this sounds very sci-fi, in part because it is drawn from sci-fi, but that doesn't necessarily mean it won't come true. The premise is that if you have an infinitely self-replicating and self-improving technology that becomes, in some sense, more intelligent than humans, again, we can debate what that means. There's endless debates around this. But the premise is that if this stuff becomes more powerful than humans, it will become more powerful than all humans, and then the person who controls it will in some sense become the dictator of the world. Now, again, this is very contested, this is very hypothetical, but the fact that we're even having conversations about this with any degree of plausibility, any at all, is crazy. And these guys know it's crazy, and yet this is still the path that many of them are pursuing. So I do not think the takeaway should be, well, if Altman shouldn't be AGI dictator, maybe it should be Dario Amodei, or maybe it should be Elon Musk, or maybe it should be Demis Hassabis. I think the takeaway should be, let's not have an AGI dictator.
Yeah. Well, before we go on to your other story about a guy who wanted to be a dictator in another country but now got defeated, and it has implications for people who may want to be dictators in this country, did you come to a conclusion about Sam Altman per se, as an individual in that context?
I think what makes Altman unique, and the reason that he was a useful focal point for these larger structural questions, is that, we're used to entrepreneurs, doing a kind of fake it till you make it strategy. We're used to people in Silicon Valley saying, we want to change the world, or don't be evil, or, and as savvy consumers of marketing, we can sometimes read between the lines and say, okay, well, they're trying to sell a product and this is the way they're marketing that product. I think what makes Altman an outlier is that he really has played both sides of the AI debate so extremely. So he started his involvement in AI by saying, we need to be really careful with this. This is the thing that is most likely to wipe out humanity, this being AI. So before he ever started an AI company, he said, AI is so dangerous that we need to start an anti-company, a safety research lab, to slow it down and make sure that it is not summoned into the world in a destructive way. The Sam Altman we know now has completely reversed course and is now, many people told us in our reporting, arguably the entity that is most accelerating the race to speed up the profusion and the summoning of AI by building massive data centers all over the world, by making these huge, unprecedented, some people say dubious financial deals all over the world. So yes, there's always marketing and there's always hype, but I think where Altman really stands out is his real eagerness to play both sides of this, and to what many people told us was to kind of tell all sides what they want to hear, be it regulators, be it investors, be it potential employee recruits. And so far, it seems to have worked, although we'll see what happens with this trial.
Really interesting. I think you've really given the listeners and your readers in the New Yorker, a lens through which to view the always evolving Sam Altman story with its implications. Listeners, if you're just joining us, it's our special Brian Lehrer show today. The weekend shows visit us on a weekday. We're kind of starting the weekend one day early for so much fun and interesting content that these shows always bring, and to help with our 2-for-1 matching day in the membership drive. Our guest representing the New Yorker Radio Hour right now is Andrew Marantz. And Andrew, let's go on to your latest article in the New Yorker. You became the first foreign journalist to interview Peter Magyar, the man who defeated Viktor Orban in Hungary. Orban, of course, a MAGA darling, and Vice President J.D. Vance had even campaigned for Orban's re-election personally, but now he's out. How much do you think we should see this as a victory for democracy over authoritarianism that has global meaning, or how much just an internal thing to the nation of Hungary?
I definitely think it has meaning for all of us, and that's why I have been over in Hungary so often in the last couple of years, not only because I'm interested in Hungary and it's a beautiful place to go, especially in the springtime, but also because it clearly has implications all over the world, and I think especially for us here. I mean, the reason I started paying attention to Hungary specifically was because in 2022, CPAC, the American conservative flagship conference, announced that it was going to have its first European offshoot, and that first European offshoot would be in Budapest. And I sort of raised my eyebrows and said, that seems weird. You know, Budapest, Hungary is known as, the only thing I really knew about it at the time was that it was the most autocratic EU member state. That's a strange place to do your American conservative conference. And from there, I've been many, many times for various pieces precisely for this reason, that I think the trajectory there has a lot to teach us here. So it's definitely, as you said, a hopeful sign to see Orban fall. This was a very, very uphill battle for the forces of the opposition. Many, many Hungarians had long ago lost their faith in the Orban regime, but they'd also lost faith that there was much they could do about it. And it was not a classic totalitarian dictatorship where if you stepped out of line, you would be, jailed or beaten or shot. It was a much more subtle form of autocracy, which is why it can look on its face like a sort of normal liberal democracy. But in fact, the system was something that Orban himself referred to as an illiberal democracy.
Talk a little bit more about that, because you use the term competitive authoritarianism, and you attribute that to the Princeton historian Jan Werner Mueller. Tell us more, because many listeners may have wondered, if Orban could lose an election, and unlike Trump, he conceded his defeat, was it really not a democracy?
Right. This is so. Actually, going back a couple of decades, the term competitive authoritarianism was originally coined by Lucan Way and Stephen Levitsky. And Stephen Levitsky went on to co-author the book How Democracies Die. And this is all part of the contested terminology, as you point out. If something is competitive, and here the word competitive means there are still competitive elections, then how can it really be authoritarian at all? And there is real debate on this subject, but I think sometimes it's oversimplified for rhetorical purposes. So the fact that you concede an election doesn't necessarily erase everything you've done for the 16 years preceding it. And what Orban was doing preceding the election was trying to tilt the playing field in his favor in a number of ways. Now, a lot of those ways, as I said, were not violent, were not even necessarily illegal per se, but they were, in many cases, not illegal because he had used his power to change the rules or the laws, and then colored within those new lines.
But go ahead.
Exactly. Well, and so this is a complicated gray area, and I think it's totally legitimate for people to question, how can someone be authoritarian and then lose an election? I think that part of the confusion there is that the word authoritarian in that context does not mean North Korean dictator. It does not mean Vladimir Putin. It does not mean, King Louis XIV, right? These things, there are many, many different forms of systems that are non-democratic. And so the non-democratic system we're talking about in Hungary, or that we're worrying about here, or that we may be talking about in India or Brazil or Turkey or a variety of other places, it's in this liminal zone. Sometimes people refer to it as a hybrid regime, something that has characteristics of both democratic and autocratic regimes. Kim Lane Shepala refers to the Frankenstate, where you pull together a lot of elements that may seem legitimate in other contexts, a semi-independent judiciary or a semi-privatized university system or a media system that is owned in large part by oligarchs, again, which may sound familiar. But combining those elements in the right way in your own national context, you can create a state that, in effect, locks in your own power. Now, it doesn't lock it in totally or perfectly or indefinitely, but it does to some extent. That's sort of what competitive authoritarianism refers to.
So in 30 seconds, and we're already over time, but this has been so interesting and important that we've kept you on. In 30 seconds, to the extent that you can do it in 30 seconds, how does Orban's defeat spill over to the United States to protect against more authoritarianism here, if you think that it does? And you did say you think that it does, but how?
Well, for one thing, it just shows people that it's possible. So people in Hungary had sort of lost hope, especially when the previous election didn't work out at all for the opposition. And it's easy to lose hope here, too. And I think, you can see not only from a successful election result, but also from the fact that things change. Peter Magyar came in and got rid of the emergency decree that had been in effect since 2020. Things really can change. Now, it's not permanent, and you're never entirely out of the woods, and you can't let up putting popular pressure on the new guy either. But it's just, it shows that despair is not really empirically suited to the situation, right? Competitive authoritarianism is not a totally lost, total bleak situation. It's still a form of system that can be changed.
Andrew Marantz, representing the New Yorker Radio Hour in the special edition of the Brian Lehrer Show, which is the weekend shows. Visit us on a weekday. Andrew is a staff writer at the New Yorker and also the author of Antisocial, Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation. Andrew, this was really interesting. Thank you for all your reporting. These are two amazing articles that we've been talking about of yours today. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, Brian. This was great.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.